By securing the entire eastern Mediterranean coastline, Alexander effectively eliminated any chance for the Persian Empire to rebuild its naval power. Capturing Egypt, the wealthiest province, not only provided substantial resources, but also offered him the potential to legitimize his rule as the rightful successor to the ancient pharaohs. The siege of Tyre in 332 BCE showcased Alexander's resolve and remarkable engineering skills. This Phoenician island city, renowned for its massive fortifications and natural defenses provided by the surrounding sea, had resisted countless previous sieges. To overcome these defenses, Alexander ordered the construction of a massive causeway connecting the island to the mainland, a monumental engineering feat that took months of labor, despite constant attacks from Tyrian ships and missile fire. Once the causeway reached the island, Alexander coordinated the use of siege towers, battering rams, and naval forces in a combined assault that eventually breached Tyre's formidable walls. Alexander's treatment of the conquered city was harsh and uncompromising. Thousands of fighting men were executed, while women and children were sold into slavery, sending a grim warning about the cost of resistance. This severity stood in stark contrast to the clemency he had shown toward cities that surrendered without fighting. Gaza, the final major Persian stronghold along the Mediterranean coast, fell after another protracted siege, effectively securing the entire eastern Mediterranean under Alexander's control. Entering Egypt, Alexander encountered virtually no opposition. The Egyptians, who had only recently lost their independence after 6 decades, viewed Persian rule as oppressive foreign domination, and welcomed Alexander as a liberator. The Egyptian priesthood further legitimized his authority by recognizing him as a pharaoh and son of the god Amen. During his time in Egypt, Alexander founded the city of Alexandria on the western edge of the Nile Delta, taking advantage of its excellent harbor potential. This city would eventually grow into the Mediterranean's foremost commercial and intellectual hub, a lasting monument to Alexander's vision of a world where Greek and Eastern cultures could merge and flourish. Alexander also famously visited the Oracle of Ammon at the Siwa oasis deep in the Libyan desert, though the exact nature of this encounter remains shrouded in mystery. Some accounts suggest the oracle proclaimed Alexander as the son of a god. Whatever transpired, the visit clearly held profound personal significance for the conqueror. Increasingly, Alexander appeared to see himself not merely as a military commander, but as a cosmic figure chosen by divine forces to fulfill a transformative mission. By spring of 331 BCE, Alexander had firmly established control over the entire eastern Mediterranean coast, and replenished his treasury with Egypt's vast wealth. His focus then shifted toward the imperial core, where Darius had used the intervening months to muster an even larger army, drawing from the wealth and manpower of upper satrapies such as Media, Persia, Bactria, and Sogdiana. The imperial forces assembled on the northern Mesopotamian plains, but Darius chose the battlefield near Gaugamela with great care, selecting open terrain that would allow his superior numbers, especially his cavalry and chariots, maximum freedom of maneuver. He even had the ground leveled to provide ideal conditions for his feared chariot charges. On the morning of October 1, 331 BCE, the two armies faced each other across the expansive plain. The Persian force, vastly outnumbering the Macedonians, stretched well beyond Alexander's lines on both flanks, threatening to encircle his army. Parmenion, Alexander's senior general, advised launching a night attack to avoid this dangerous situation, but Alexander insisted on engaging in daylight battle, famously declaring, "I will not steal my victory." As combat began, Darius deployed his scythed chariots against the Macedonian ranks, aiming to disrupt their formations before the main engagement. Alexander's troops, however, were well trained to meet this threat. They simply opened their ranks, allowing the chariots to pass harmlessly through, then quickly closed ranks again in good order. The failure of the chariot charge was the first of several tactical setbacks for the Persians that day. The main battle unfolded according to Alexander's meticulously devised plan. Observing that Darius had reinforced his left wing to counter the anticipated Macedonian cavalry assault there, Alexander shifted his elite forces slightly to the right as the Macedonian line advanced in a diagonal formation. The Persian troops on the left wing followed this movement, eventually creating a gap in the center of their formation. Seizing this critical opportunity, Alexander led his companion cavalry in a wedge formation straight toward Darius's position at the center of the Persian line. At the same time, Macedonian infantry engaged the Persian foot soldiers, preventing them from closing the gap that Alexander's charge was creating. Darius, realizing that his diverse imperial forces relied heavily on centralized leadership, unlike the more integrated Macedonian army, saw his cavalry breaking through toward him. Perhaps recalling the outcome of previous battles, he chose to withdraw rather than risk capture. His flight threw the nearby Persian units into confusion, which rapidly spread across the imperial center and right flank. Meanwhile, on the Persian left, their cavalry had managed to break through Macedonian lines and reached the enemy baggage train. However, this localized success came too late to change the overall outcome of the battle. With the collapse of the Persian center, the Battle of Gaugamela concluded with a full-scale retreat of the imperial army. Though the casualties were not as devastating as they might have been, Darius escaped with a sizable escort, intending to rally further forces in the eastern Satrapy. After a brief pursuit, Alexander turned toward Babylon, the greatest city of Mesopotamia and one of the empire's key capitals. Babylon's peaceful surrender marked a critical milestone in the campaign. The Babylonian satrap Mazachis chose cooperation over resistance, and Alexander rewarded this loyalty by allowing Mazachis to retain his position under the new regime. This policy of integrating cooperative imperial officials into the administration became characteristic of Alexander's approach, enabling relatively smooth transitions in governance. From Babylon, Alexander proceeded to Susa, another imperial capital, housing immense treasuries, which now fell into his hands. The wealth amassed through centuries of imperial taxation provided the resources to finance Alexander's ongoing campaigns and reward his soldiers. Yet even these riches were overshadowed by what awaited the Macedonian army at Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the empire. Arriving at Persepolis in January 330 BCE, Alexander entered the magnificent complex built by Darius I and his successors. Here stood the tangible embodiment of Persian imperial ideology and artistic achievement. Grand staircases adorned with reliefs depicting tribute bearers from 23 nations, vast audience halls supported by forests of towering columns, and treasuries filled with wealth accumulated over 2 centuries. Alexander's initial conduct at Persepolis showed notable restraint. While permitting his troops to plunder the treasury as a reward, he protected the palaces and administrative buildings from indiscriminate looting, installing trusted officers to oversee the complex. He seemed to recognize Persepolis's symbolic significance as a center of imperial legitimacy, one he might someday claim for himself. However, several months later, following a victory celebration banquet, the palace complex was set ablaze in an act that remains controversial. Ancient sources offer conflicting versions. Some describe the fire as an accidental blaze started during drunken revelry, while others suggest it was a deliberate act of retribution for Xerxes' burning of Athens, a century and a half earlier, possibly encouraged by an Athenian courtesan named Tyche. Most likely, the destruction was a symbolic gesture signifying the end of the old imperial order and the dawn of a new era. By burning the ceremonial heart of the empire, while sparing its administrative capitals, Babylon and Susa, Alexander may have been signaling both continuity and transformation, preserving the practical governance apparatus, while ritually ending its previous ideological framework. Regardless of motive, the burning of Persepolis was a turning point. This magnificent complex, the product of 2 centuries of imperial prosperity and artistic endeavor, suffered irreparable damage, though parts would later be partially restored. Persepolis never recovered its former grandeur. Instead, it stood as a solemn testament to the rise and fall of an empire. Its shattered columns and scorched reliefs bore silent witness to the fleeting nature of even the most magnificent political achievements. With the major imperial capitals now firmly in his grasp, Alexander shifted focus to the pursuit of Darius, who had fled eastward toward Ecbatana in Media. The Macedonian forces, reinforced by fresh recruits, and the immense riches seized from the imperial treasuries, advanced swiftly through rugged terrain. Yet Darius moved even faster, managing to stay just ahead of his pursuers. From Ecbatana, the Persian king pressed further east, aiming to reach the provinces of Bactria and Sogdiana, where the satrap Bessus commanded considerable forces. These distant regions, known for their fierce inhabitants and challenging landscapes, offered potential refuge and a base for continued resistance. However, Darius's position became increasingly precarious as his escort diminished through desertions, with many nobles calculating that aligning with the victorious Macedonian would better serve their interests. The final act of this imperial drama unfolded near Hecatompylos in Parthia. There Bessus and other high-ranking officials accompanying Darius arrested the king, possibly intending to use him as leverage against Alexander. But as Alexander's vanguard approached sooner than anticipated, the conspirators fatally wounded Darius and fled eastward. Bessus then proclaimed himself the new ruler. Alexander's troops soon found Darius gravely wounded by the roadside, a victim of betrayal by his own followers. Regardless of his personal sentiments, Alexander recognized the symbolic power in the moment. Draping the fallen sovereign with his own cloak, he ordered a royal burial to be prepared. Later he arranged a grand funeral at Persepolis, honoring Darius with full imperial rights. By doing so, Alexander portrayed himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as the legitimate successor avenging the last true Achaemenid king. This theme of continuity, rather than outright conquest, became increasingly central to Alexander's strategy. While he had initially presented himself to the Greek city-states as a liberator from Persian domination, he now sought to position himself as the rightful heir to the Achaemenid legacy. He adopted aspects of Persian court ceremony, began wearing imperial regalia, and appointed cooperative former Persian officials to govern key posts. Meanwhile, Bessus and other holdouts fled toward Bactria. Consolidating his hold on the imperial core, Alexander paid homage to the empire's founder by visiting the tomb of Cyrus the Great at Pasargadae, a gesture linking himself to the ancient tradition. His army, now increasingly composed of Macedonians, Greeks, and recruits from former imperial territories, pressed onward in pursuit of Bessus. The campaigns against Bessus and subsequent operations in Bactria, Sogdiana, and eventually into India, lie beyond the scope of the Achaemenid narrative. Suffice it to say, Alexander ultimately captured and executed Bessus, symbolically avenging Darius, and extinguishing the last significant claim to the Persian imperial throne. These eastern provinces were absorbed into Alexander's expanding realm, though at tremendous cost in time, resources, and lives. Alexander's sudden death in Babylon in 323 BCE at the age of 32, following a brief illness, left his vast empire without a clear successor. The enormous domain he had assembled fragmented under competing generals and eventually stabilized into several major Hellenistic kingdoms. The former Achaemenid territories primarily fell under the control of Seleucus and his descendants, who retained many of the Achaemenid administrative systems, while introducing Greek cultural elements and establishing Greek settlements. What explains this sudden imperial collapse? How did an empire that endured for over 2 centuries, surviving past external invasions and internal crises, fall so quickly to a relatively small opponent from its northwestern frontier? The answer lies in a complex mix of systemic weaknesses, unfortunate timing, and the extraordinary skill of the Macedonian leader. The empire Alexander faced was not at its peak. Decades of administrative decline, financial strain, and increasingly autonomous satraps had steadily weakened central authority. Darius III's ascent achieved through palace intrigue rather than traditional succession, and the purging of rivals had fragmented noble support networks. At a moment demanding unity, the empire's military had fallen behind innovations developing outside its borders. While cavalry drawn from the imperial corps remained elite, infantry quality and training lagged behind the advanced tactics of Greek and Macedonian armies. The growing dependence on Greek mercenaries, though providing capable troops, strained finances, and introduced loyalty concerns. Most critically, the empire's complex, multi-ethnic armies lacked the unified command and tactical flexibility that defined Alexander's forces. Yet structural flaws alone do not fully explain the collapse. The decisive factor was Alexander himself. A commander of unparalleled talent, commanding a revolutionary military system. His tactical ingenuity, personal leadership, strategic vision, and extraordinary operational speed repeatedly disoriented imperial forces. No prior adversary had combined these qualities so effectively, and the Persian Empire was unprepared for such an unprecedented threat. Timing also played a crucial role. Had Alexander invaded a generation earlier, during the capable reign of Artaxerxes III, or if Darius III had more time to consolidate power, the outcome might have differed. The convergence of imperial weakness and Macedonian strength at this specific historical juncture proved decisive. Importantly, this rapid collapse did not signal a total institutional breakdown. Administrative systems, communication networks, and governance structures continued to operate under new rulers. Alexander and his successors preserved imperial roads, taxation methods, and many other Achaemenid innovations. This continuity amid political upheaval attests to the fundamental solidity of the empire's framework, even in its final years. Therefore, the fall of the Achaemenid Empire represents less a complete civilizational collapse, and more a dramatic political transformation. The governance structures developed over 2 centuries endured under new leadership, while the empire's cultural achievements, technological innovations, and administrative practices influenced future civilizations across Eurasia. As the fires at Persepolis died down in the spring of 330 BCE, they revealed a damaged but still imposing symbol of imperial accomplishment. Like those fire-scarred stones, the empire's legacy would persist long after its political power faded, continuing to shape successor states for centuries. The fall of the Achaemenid Empire to Alexander did not mark the end of Iranian imperial traditions. After nearly 5 centuries under Seleucid, Greek, and then Parthian rule, a new dynasty would emerge, consciously positioning itself as the heir to Achaemenid grandeur. The Sassanids, originating from the province of Persis, the same region that produced Cyrus and his successors, would establish a powerful realm that rivaled Rome for over 4 centuries, and preserved many ancient imperial traditions. To understand this revival, one must briefly examine developments in the centuries following Alexander's death. His empire fractured under competing generals, with the eastern former territories mainly falling under Seleucid control. The Seleucids built a vast but unstable realm, maintaining many Achaemenid administrative practices while incorporating Greek cultural elements. They founded new cities populated by Greek settlers, and developed a Greco-Ionian hybrid court culture. By the mid-2nd century BCE, Seleucid authority weakened in the eastern provinces. From the northeastern region of Parthia arose the Sassanid dynasty, which led a confederation of semi-nomadic peoples, who gradually conquered the Iranian plateau, Mesopotamia, and parts of Anatolia, known externally as the Parthians. They established a loosely centralized empire that endured for nearly 5 centuries. While powerful, the Parthian realm never achieved the administrative centralization or cultural unity of the Achaemenids. Its structure resembled a confederation of semi-autonomous kingdoms and city-states under nominal overlordship. Parthian kings bore the ancient title King of Kings, but power was shared with influential noble families controlling vast territories. Greek cultural influence remained strong in urban centers, while Iranian traditions persisted in rural areas and among the aristocracy. The eastward expansion of Rome brought these 2 powers into prolonged conflict, initiating a rivalry that shaped ancient geopolitics for centuries. Despite occasional Roman advances, such as Emperor Trajan's brief conquest of Mesopotamia, the Parthians generally succeeded in preserving their independence and territorial integrity against the Western superpower. By the early 3rd century CE, the Parthian system was showing unmistakable signs of decline. Ongoing struggles over succession had significantly weakened the central authority, while powerful noble families, especially the influential Southern and Karen clans, acted more as independent rulers than loyal vassals to the throne. Repeated incursions by Roman forces had exposed vulnerabilities in Parthian military strength. The conditions were ripe for profound transformation. Amid this instability emerged Artaxerxes, a local ruler from Persis who claimed descent from a priestly lineage known as the Sassanids. By 220 CE, having solidified his control over his home province, Ardashir began expanding his domain at the expense of the Parthians. His decisive victory over the last Parthian king, Artabanus V, in 224 CE, marked the official beginning of the Sassanid dynasty. While the full conquest of former Parthian lands took several more years of campaigning, Ardashir and his successors framed their ascent not as the birth of a new imperial order, but rather as a revival of ancient glory. They deliberately linked themselves to the Achaemenids, asserting descent from the Kayanian kings revered in Zoroastrian tradition. Although modern scholars question the literal accuracy of these genealogical claims, they reflected a genuine cultural continuity and a deliberate program of imperial restoration. This revival was evident across multiple domains. Administratively, the Sassanids established a far more centralized governance system than their Parthian predecessors. Provinces were governed directly by officials appointed by and accountable to the monarch. The ancient title King of Kings was retained, but now backed by stronger central control and a hierarchical bureaucracy. The use of written Middle Persian Pahlavi rather than Aramaic supported this more centralized administration. Zoroastrianism, which under the Parthians had remained influential but not formally dominant, was elevated to the status of state religion by the Sassanids. Ardashir, whose father had been a priest, granted unprecedented authority to the Zoroastrian clergy. Religious texts were standardized, and temples were established throughout the empire. While other faiths were generally tolerated, they were placed in a subordinate legal position. This religious organization provided ideological support for royal authority and helped foster cultural unity across the empire's diverse populations. In architecture, the Sassanids deliberately echoed Achaemenid grandeur while incorporating new innovations. At sites such as Firuzabad, Bishapur, and Takibostan, massive palaces featured distinctive architectural elements like the Iwana vaulted hall open at one end that would later influence Islamic architecture. Rock reliefs carved near Naqshi Rustam, the location of Achaemenid royal tombs, explicitly linked Sassanid rulers to their ancient imperial predecessors, while celebrating their own achievements. Militarily, the Sassanids improved upon the Parthian system, maintaining the excellent cavalry traditions of prior Iranian empires, but introducing heavily armored cavalry units, with both horse and rider protected by armor, alongside war elephants. They also developed engineering corps capable of sophisticated siege warfare to complement their field armies. These innovations enabled them to stand their ground against Rome and later the Byzantine Empire for centuries. The early Sassanid period saw remarkable expansion. Shapur I, son and successor of Ardashir, achieved spectacular victories over Rome, even capturing Emperor Valerian, the only Roman emperor ever taken prisoner and dying in captivity. At its height under Shapur I, the Sassanid Empire stretched from the Euphrates River in the west to the Indus River in the east, and from the Caucasus Mountains in the north to the Arabian Sea in the south, nearly matching the eastern half of the Achaemenid Empire at its zenith. However, unlike their Achaemenid predecessors, the Sassanids faced a Western rival equal in power and sophistication. Rome and later the Eastern Roman Empire matched the Sassanids in military strength, administrative complexity, and cultural confidence. This balance of power led to a centuries-long stalemate, with contested border regions like Armenia, Upper Mesopotamia, and parts of the Caucasus frequently shifting hands, but neither side gaining a decisive advantage. This protracted Roman-Sassanid rivalry deeply influenced both civilizations. Military technologies and innovations developed by one side were swiftly adopted by the other. Diplomatic protocols evolved to regulate relations between equals, rather than subjugated foes. Even during times of war, trade persisted, facilitating cultural exchanges that flowed both ways. Religious developments added complexity. The rise of Christianity in the Roman world, and the growth of Manichaeism within Sassanid lands, introduced new internal dynamics and competition. Within Sassanid society, distinctive social hierarchies took shape that would influence Iranian history for centuries. At the top was the royal family, whose claim to divine right to rule was based on the concept of royal glory. Below them were four main classes: priests, warriors, scribes, and producers. Although social mobility existed, It typically occurred through service to the state or religious institutions, and within clearly defined limits. Urban life thrived under Sassanid rule. The empire's capitals grew into some of the largest cities of their time, featuring monumental structures such as the massive Arch of Ctesiphon, which held the record for the largest single-span vault for over a millennium. Other key urban centers included Gundashopur, renowned for its Academy of Medicine and Philosophy, Bishopur, noted for its architectural fusion of Iranian and Roman styles, and the ancient city of Persepolis, which retained symbolic importance, connecting to Achaemenid traditions. From these centers, trade networks radiated in all directions. Sassanid merchants established commercial colonies as far east as China and Southeast Asia. Luxury goods, particularly silk from China and spices from India, passed through Sassanid territory en route to Mediterranean markets, serving as a vital intermediary. The silk industry exemplified this dynamic. Initially reliant on imports from China, the Sassanids eventually acquired silkworm eggs and mastered silk production themselves. Their textiles, distinguished by medallion patterns often featuring royal or religious motifs, became prized luxury items throughout the Mediterranean and as far north as Europe. Byzantine textile manufacturing would later draw heavily from Sassanid designs, leaving a lasting artistic legacy. Religious diversity marked the Sassanid Empire, despite Zoroastrianism's official status. Jewish communities established since Achaemenid times maintained significant presence, especially in Mesopotamia, where the Babylonian Talmud was compiled during this era. Christian populations grew, particularly in western provinces, sometimes causing friction with Zoroastrian authorities, but often finding ways to coexist within the system. Manichaeans, Buddhists, and various adherents of local faiths further enriched the empire's religious tapestry, adding layers of complexity to its cultural landscape. This religious and cultural diversity sometimes led to tensions, especially when faith communities aligned with political conflicts. For instance, Christians living within the Sassanid domains were occasionally viewed with suspicion due to their shared religion with Byzantium, a frequent adversary of the Sassanid Empire. Despite these suspicions, practical tolerance typically prevailed. Religious minorities accepted a subordinate legal position but in return received protection and communal autonomy within the empire. The Sassanid period was also notable for remarkable intellectual advancements. The academy at Gundashopur emerged as a premier center of medical scholarship, where Greek, Indian, and indigenous Iranian medical knowledge was translated, synthesized, and expanded. Astronomy and mathematics continued the long-standing traditions rooted in Mesopotamian science, with scholars observing celestial phenomena and refining calculations. Philosophical thought flourished as well, combining Greek philosophical works translated into Middle Persian with original compositions, fostering a rich intellectual culture. Sometimes, this intellectual activity crossed imperial boundaries. After the Byzantine Emperor Justinian closed Plato's academy in Athens in 529 CE, several Neoplatonic philosophers sought refuge at the Sassanid court. Their eventual return to Byzantine lands helped reintroduce Persian-influenced philosophical ideas back to the Mediterranean world. Likewise, Indian advances in mathematics and astronomy reached the Middle East through Sassanid intermediaries, enriching the broader intellectual landscape. The Middle Sassanid era was characterized by alternating periods of strength and instability, often reflecting the capabilities of individual rulers. The empire endured constant warfare with Rome and Byzantium, as well as intermittent internal challenges like noble rebellions and succession disputes. Nonetheless, the core institutions and cultural accomplishments remained resilient. The reign of Khosrow I, also known as Anushirvan, from 531 to 579 CE, is frequently regarded as the apex of Sassanid achievement. Under his rule, the empire saw extensive administrative reforms that reinforced centralized authority and restructured the tax system. Diplomatic relations with Byzantium stabilized following a major peace treaty, while cultural and intellectual life flourished, enriched by translations of Indian and Greek works. His successor, Khosrow II Parviz, initially sustained this momentum and achieved extraordinary territorial expansion in the early 7th century. At its zenith during his reign, the Sassanid Empire briefly controlled Egypt, the Levant, and much of Anatolia, territories that had belonged to the Achaemenid Empire, but had remained under Western control for nearly a millennium. This rapid expansion, however, was short-lived and disastrous. Byzantine Emperor Heraclius launched a decisive counterattack that not only reclaimed lost lands, but carried the war deep into the Sassanid heartland. By 628 CE, by this time, Khosrow II had been overthrown and executed by his own nobles, and the empire spiraled into chaos with a rapid succession of rulers vying for the throne. This internal disintegration, compounded by decades of exhausting warfare, left the empire dangerously vulnerable on the brink of its greatest challenge. Despite fierce resistance, including notable battles such as El-Qadisiyah in 636 CE and Nahavand in 642 CE, the Sassanid military ultimately could not withstand these dynamic new adversaries. The last Sassanid monarch, Yazdegerd III, fled eastward but was killed in 651 CE, marking the dynasty's end. The Arab conquests ushered in profound transformations across the former Sassanid lands. Islam gradually supplanted Zoroastrianism as the dominant religion, though the process was gradual and conversion was never complete. Arabic replaced Middle Persian as the language of administration and high culture, though Persian would eventually reassert itself in a transformed form. New political institutions replaced the Sassanid system, incorporating these eastern territories into the rapidly expanding Islamic Caliphate. Beneath these sweeping changes, remarkable continuities endured. The Caliphate's administrative practices, court ceremonies, and governmental structures drew heavily on Sassanid precedents. Persian-speaking bureaucrats continued to staff the administrative apparatus, preserving the imperial legacy. Literary and artistic traditions maintained many pre-Islamic motifs, even as they evolved in new directions. The idea of Iran as a distinct cultural and historical entity survived the loss of political independence. Most notably, Persian culture experienced a remarkable revival within the Islamic framework. By the 9th and 10th centuries CE, semi-independent Iranian dynasties such as the Sassanids patronized Persian language, literature, and art. The epic tradition of pre-Islamic Iran found splendid expression in Ferdowsi Shahnameh, composed around the year 1000 CE. This monumental work preserved ancient Iranian history and mythology for future generations, linking the Islamic present to a pre-Islamic past, and maintaining a continuous cultural identity, despite religious transformation. This resilience of culture attests to the profound legacies of both the Achaemenid and Sassanid empires. Though separated by centuries and differing in many organizational and ideological aspects, both established governance traditions, cultural expressions, and identity markers that transcended their political forms. The fall of dynasties did not erase the civilizations they nurtured. As we conclude this chapter on the Sassanid era in Iran's imperial saga, a clear pattern emerges. Continuity amid change defines much of this region's history. The deliberate Sassanid revival of Achaemenid traditions, followed by the preservation of Sassanid elements within Islamic civilization, illustrates how imperial legacies can outlive their original political frameworks and influence subsequent historical trajectories over centuries and even millennia. The collapse of the Sassanid Empire in the mid-7th century marked the end of independent Iranian imperial rule, but not the end of its imperial heritage. Though Arab conquerors introduced new religion, language, and political structures to territories once governed from Persepolis and Ctesiphon, the accomplishments of these ancient empires continued to shape civilization far beyond their original time and place. This enduring influence manifested across multiple spheres. In governance, the administrative system pioneered by the Achaemenids provided a model for managing vast territories that later empires adopted and adapted. Alexander the Great maintained much of this system after his conquest, as did his Seleucid successors. The early Islamic Caliphate incorporated many Sassanid governmental practices, often employing Persian-speaking officials, who brought their bureaucratic expertise to the new regime. The physical infrastructure built under imperial rule demonstrated extraordinary durability. Road networks established during the Achaemenid period remained vital arteries for centuries. Some qanats, underground water channels constructed during this era, continue to function today, representing perhaps the longest continuously used human-built infrastructure on Earth. Cities founded or developed under imperial patronage: Alexandria in Egypt, Kandahar in Afghanistan, and Bukhara in Central Asia, maintained their importance through numerous political transitions. Artistic and architectural influences radiated widely from imperial centers. Sassanid textile designs appeared in Byzantine silks and later European fabrics. The four-part garden layout divided by water channels, the Chahora Bog, spread from Iran to India under the Mughals, then to Central Asia, and eventually to Moorish Spain. Architectural elements like the Sassanid Iwan vaulted hall became fundamental features of Islamic architecture from Spain to India. Religious ideas developed or refined within the imperial realm exerted some of the most profound and far-reaching impacts. Zoroastrian concepts such as cosmic dualism, linear time progressing toward a final judgment, and notions of heaven, hell, and future salvation influenced Judaism during the Babylonian exile and the Achaemenid era. These concepts subsequently entered Christianity and Islam, to faiths whose adherents now number in the billions. Though filtered through centuries of theological evolution, ancient Iranian religious thought continues to shape many people's understanding of their relationship to the divine. The linguistic legacy stretches from antiquity into the present day. Persian vocabulary entered numerous languages, from Turkish and Urdu to Armenian and Swahili. The administrative use of Aramaic under the Achaemenids established it as a lingua franca across the Middle East, enabling its later role as the everyday language of Jesus, and the language from which the scripts for Arabic, Hebrew, and other Middle Eastern writing systems developed. Perhaps most significantly, the imperial approach to cultural diversity set an alternative model to the assimilationist policies common among ancient states. The Achaemenid innovation, further developed by the Sassanids, was the creation of a universal empire that accommodated diversity rather than enforcing uniformity. This approach influenced imperial projects from Rome through the modern era. The recognition that different peoples could maintain distinct identities while participating in a shared political community established a framework that continues to inform modern multicultural governance. The very concept of Irana, cultural, linguistic, and historical entity, distinct from its political manifestations and particular states, owes much to this imperial legacy through shared history, language, and cultural traditions forged during the imperial period. Iranian identity survived repeated conquests, dynastic upheavals, and religious transformations. This continuity enabled the remarkable cultural renaissance within the Islamic context, producing the brilliant achievements of medieval Persian literature, art, and science. The Shahnameh, composed around 1000 CE, epitomizes this cultural resilience. This epic preserved ancient Iranian historical and mythological narratives, bridging the Islamic present to the pre-Islamic past, and maintaining cultural continuity across religious change. Its enduring popularity has kept awareness of imperial achievements alive in popular consciousness. The geographical notion of Iran similarly exhibits remarkable continuity from ancient times to today. Although political borders have shifted over centuries, the core territorial concept of Iran centered on the plateau between the Zagros and Hindu Kush mountains remained consistent from Achaemenid through Sassanid times and into the Islamic era. This enduring geographical idea eventually informed the modern nation-state, which officially adopted the name Iran in 1935, explicitly linking the contemporary polity to its ancient imperial predecessors. In modern geopolitics, awareness of Iran's imperial past shapes both internal self-perceptions and external views of its regional role. Iranian self-conception as heir to ancient civilization achievements influences its diplomatic stance and strategic thinking. Meanwhile, outside powers often interpret Iranian regional influence through the prism of historical imperial boundaries, whether embraced or contested. These perceptions highlight the ongoing relevance of imperial memory in contemporary international relations and institutions. Echoes of imperial concepts persist in unexpected places. The Cyrus cylinder, which records the conqueror's policies after taking Babylon, has been described as an early human rights charter, with a replica displayed at the United Nations headquarters in New York. While applying modern ideas to an ancient text requires caution, it nonetheless illustrates the lasting significance of Achaemenid approaches to governance and diversity in modern discourse. Ultimately, the greatest legacy of these empires is not found solely in institutions or artifacts, but in demonstrating how political frameworks can transcend their original contexts to influence succeeding civilizations. The administrative systems, artistic traditions, religious ideas, and models of multinational governance pioneered by these ancient rulers continue shaping how societies organize politically, express themselves culturally, and understand spirituality. This pattern of political structures, rising and falling while their cultural contributions evolve and endure, may be the most profound insight from our exploration. The empires of Cyrus, the son of his two spies, and their successors did not merely build transient states, but forged enduring civilizational legacies that continue influencing our world in both visible and subtle ways. In this sense, the first great multinational empire achieved a unique kind of immortality, its influence persisting not through political power, but in humanity's ongoing dialogue about how to create societies that balance unity with diversity, tradition with innovation, and authority with justice.